The delivery guy stood on my porch, holding this huge, beautiful box. I remember the sun was hitting the plastic window, making the flowers inside glow. I signed for it my name, a quick scrawl on the electronic pad, my mind already racing an anniversary surprise. But our anniversary wasn't for months, a birthday, no. I carried the box inside, the weight of it feeling significant, and set it on the kitchen island. The crisp white cardboard was stark against the dark granite. I used the kitchen shears to cut the clear tape, the sound sharp in the quiet house. When I lifted the lid, the scent hit me first, not just any flowers, stargazer. Lilies, their perfume heavy and sweet, mixed with the peppery scent of eucalyptus. They were extravagant, dozens of deep pink roses, the kind that cost a fortune, and sprays of white orchids. It was a florist's masterpiece, the kind of arrangement you see in magazines. Spreads my heart did a little flip of pleasure, a pure, uncomplicated joy. He into a solid, terrifying structure of suspicion. He loves you, she said, and her voice broke on the word. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. He really truly does. And he's a good man, a kind man. He doesn't deserve this. He doesn't deserve to have his life blown apart because you're bored or lonely or whatever it is you're feeling. She was pleading with me. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a confession. She was laying her own heart bare. I know you think I am just the secretary with a crush, maybe I am. But this feeling I have for him, it's why I couldn't stand by and watch you destroy him. I couldn't. If you want be loyal to him, then someone has to be. In that moment, sitting in the harsh light of that anonymous cafe, I didn't see an adversary, I saw a mirror. I saw the reflection of a love for my own husband, a love I had buried under resentment and neglect. And the cheap thrill of a secret, Sarah's love for him, was pure if misguided. It was protective. My love had become a weapon I was wielding against him. She forced me to see the man I had married not as a fixture in my life, not as the cause of my dissatisfaction, but as a person who was quietly, unknowingly, being betrayed by the person he trusted most. I left the coffee shop numb. The world outside looked different. The colors were too bright, the sounds too sharp. The weight of what I had done wasn't just a secret anymore, it was a tangible burden on my shoulders. The fear of exposure was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was now dwarfed by something far heavier, far more brutal, guilt, real, crushing, undeniable guilt. Sarah's words played on a loop in my head. He doesn't deserve this. For days, I moved through the house like a ghost. I made dinners that tasted of ash. I smiled at David, and the smile felt like a crack in my face. I watched him, really watched him. I saw the slight graying at his temples, the way he sighed when he took off his shoes after a long day, the gentle, patient way he dealt with everyone. I saw the man Sarah saw. And I saw the invisible damage I was inflicting. The affair was over, but the lie was still there, a poison seeping into the foundations of our life together. The question now wasn't about whether I could get away with it. The question was whether I could live with myself. If I did, could I continue to share a bed with him, to accept his kindness, to be the recipient of a loyalty I had so carelessly discarded? Self-preservation screamed at me to stay silent, to let the affair be a closed chapter, to try to reinvest in my marriage, to hope that time would bury the truth. That was the easy path, the coward's path. But Sarah's act, her desperate, loving intervention, had made the easy path impossible. She had held up a light, and I could no longer pretend I was stumbling in the dark. I had to choose. I could continue the performance, the biggest lie of all, that everything was fine, or I could do the one thing I had been avoiding for years. I could be honest. I don't know what will happen. I don't know if the truth will destroy us completely, or if by some miracle it might be the first step toward building something new, something real. The future is a terrifying blank page. But the past, the secret I've carried, is a chain. And tonight when David comes home, I'm going to try to break it. I'm going to tell him everything, not because I was caught, but because I finally saw myself through the eyes of a woman who loves him more honestly than I have known how to for a very long time. The flowers Sarah sent were meant to be a weapon, but they became a key. They unlocked a door I had sealed shut, and now I have to walk through it into the wreckage, and hope that somewhere in the ruins, there's a chance for salvation. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, listening to his steady breathing beside me. The man I thought I knew was lying right there. But a chasm had opened up between us. I studied his profile in the dim light, the familiar line of his jaw, the way his hand was curled under his pillow. Was he dreaming of her? Was the secret a life with her? Or was it something else? Her words, "I can't keep his secret anymore," implied a burden, fear, not just guilt. The note didn't read like a mistress triumphant reveal. It The delivery was so unexpected, a courier at the door, holding this enormous beautiful arrangement of white lilies and pale pink roses. My first thought was it must be from Robert, an apology for having to work late again, for missing another dinner. It was our anniversary, next week, maybe an early surprise. I remember feeling a little flutter of that old excitement, the kind you feel when you think you're still being courted. I brought them inside, put them on the kitchen island, their scent filling the room. It was a sweet, hopeful smell. I found the small envelope tucked among the stems. I opened it with a smile already on my face, ready to read his familiar, elegant script. But the handwriting wasn't his, it was different, neater, almost feminine. And the message, it made no sense. It was just two short sentences. You are stronger than you think. Start looking at the offshore accounts. I read it 3 times. My smile just faded away. Offshore accounts. That was a term from movies, from thrillers, not from my life, not from our life. Robert handled all our finances, he said. It was easier that way, that he had the head for numbers, that I shouldn't have to worry about it. And I hadn't worried. I'd trusted him completely. But this note, it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know existed. A cold feeling started in my stomach. A tightness. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a deep, unsettling recognition. As if someone had just spoken aloud a fear I'd been whispering to myself in the quietest moments, when the house was too silent, and the life we'd built felt a little too perfect, a little too much like a stage set. The flowers suddenly didn't seem beautiful anymore. They seemed like an omen, a warning wrapped in petals. Who would send this? And why? I looked at the note again. You are stronger than you think. It felt like a validation. For years I'd pushed down little doubts, dismissed my own instincts as paranoia, the way he'd isolate me from friends, saying they weren't good for me, the way every decision, from the car I drove to the vacations we took, was ultimately his. I'd told myself it was because he cared, because he was protective. This note, this strange anonymous message, was the first time anyone had ever suggested that maybe my unease was justified, that maybe I had a right to question things. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to him, listening to his steady breathing, and I felt a chasm opening between us. The next morning, after he left for the office, I didn't go to my yoga class. I went into his home office. It was a place I rarely went into. It was his domain. The air always smelled like his cologne and old paper. I started carefully, not even sure what I was looking for. I was nervous, my hands trembling. Every time I heard a car pass by the house, I began with the filing cabinet, tax returns, property deeds, all seemed in order. But then I found a file he'd labeled archived investments. Inside were statements from a bank I'd never heard of, based in the Cayman Islands. The account was in his name, only the balances were staggering amounts that didn't match the comfortable but modest life we were living. Why would he have millions sitting in an account overseas, while he talked about needing to be careful with our spending? Read like a confession, a plea. By the time the sun came up, my decision was made. I had to go. Dread and determination were tangled together inside me, a tight knot in my chest. A few days later, another email arrived in a new anonymous account I'd created. No subject, just a link to a public records database. And a case number. The case was from 10 years ago in another state. It was a wrongful death lawsuit. The plaintiff was a woman named Eleanor Shaw. The defendant was Robert. The case was dismissed, settled out of court. My blood ran cold. Eleanor Shaw. That was the name of his first wife, the one he said had died in a tragic hiking accident. He never talked about her much, said it was too painful. I'd always thought it was sweet how loyal he still was to her memory. But a lawsuit, a wrongful death suit. My hands were ice cold as I searched for her name online. There were a few old newspaper articles. They described her as a vibrant, successful artist. They mentioned the accident, but they also quoted a friend of hers who said Eleanor had become increasingly withdrawn in the months before her death, that she seemed afraid the friend had tried to get her to leave Robert, but Eleanor had said she had nowhere to go, that he controlled everything. The pieces were starting to click into a picture. I didn't want to see the offshore money, the isolated first wife, who died under mysterious circumstances. The pattern was there, clear as day. He found successful women, made them dependent, isolated them. And then what? The email had guided me right to it. This wasn't a random act, this was a rescue mission. I finally replied to the anonymous email address. I just wrote, "Who are you?" The response came almost immediately. "Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m. The Garden Cafe." I knew the place. It was quiet, public. I went there, with a knot of fear and hope in my chest. I saw her sitting at a corner table. Sarah, Robert's secretary, she'd been with him for 5 years. She was always perfectly polite, efficient, invisible. She looked up as I approached, and her face was full of a deep, weary sadness. I sat down, and for a minute we just looked at each other. She spoke first, her voice low and steady. I worked for Alina. She said I was her personal assistant before she married Robert. I helped manage her art career. She was brilliant, so full of life. Sarah's eyes glistened. Then she met him slowly. He cut her off from everyone, from her friends, her family, from me. He took over her finances, sold her studio, said it was for their future. The light in her just went out. She took a sip of water, her hand shaking slightly. A few months before she died, she called me. She sounded terrified. She said she'd found accounts, secret accounts. She said he was draining her assets, and she felt trapped. She said she was going to confront him. The next thing I heard, she was gone. Sarah looked directly at me. When Robert hired me a year later, I couldn't believe it. I think he liked the irony, or he thought I was too cowed to be a threat. I took the job because I wanted to watch him. And when he started dating you, when I saw the same pattern beginning again, I knew I couldn't be silent a second time. It all made sense, the careful guidance, the specific documents. She had been watching, waiting for the right moment to intervene. The flowers were her lifeline. He's planning a trip for you, both next month, she said, a remote island. He's been insuring you heavily. It's happening again. You have to get out. But you have to be smart, you have to be safe. The coffee shop on Elm Street was quiet at 10 on a weekday. I saw her immediately, sitting in a booth in the back, 2 ceramic mugs already on the table. She looked pale. Her usually impeccable appearance was slightly frayed. Her hair was a little less perfect, her sweater a simple knit, instead of her usual sharp blazer. She wasn't looking at her phone. She was just staring into her coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around the mug. She looked up as I approached, and her eyes were redrimmed. She looked terrified. That was the turning point, the moment the last illusion shattered. I wasn't living a life. I was playing a part in a tragedy that had already had a first run. The fear was still there, a cold, sharp thing. But it was now joined by a fierce, clear determination. I would not be a leaner. The next few weeks were a secret operation. With Sarah's help, I became a ghost in my own home. I copied every document I could find. I recorded conversations where he subtly threatened me, talked about the trip, about how accidents happen. I secured the evidence with a lawyer. Sarah trusted a former prosecutor. I quietly moved small amounts of my own money from a forgotten inheritance. My father had left me an account Robert never knew about, into a new bank account. I packed a single bag with essentials and left it at Sarah's house. The confrontation wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, and that made it more terrifying. It was the night before we were supposed to leave for the island. We were in the living room. He was talking about the itinerary, about the beautiful, secluded villa. I just looked at him and said, I am not going. Robert, I know about Alina. I know about the accounts. I know about the insurance policies. The change in him was instantaneous. The charming mask fell away, and what was underneath was cold and flat. His eyes went empty. There was no yelling, no denial, just a quiet, you stupid woman, what do you think you can do? I've already done it, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My lawyer has everything. The police have been notified. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. If you try to stop me from walking out that door right now, it all goes public. I stood up. He just watched me, a predator calculating the odds. He saw that I was no longer prey, I was a threat, and he was above all a coward. I walked out. I got into my car, and I drove to Sarah's apartment. I didn't look back. The changed everything was a collapse. It was a liberation. The divorce was swift, thanks to the evidence. He didn't fight it. He just disappeared from my life, probably to find another shadow to hide in. I used the information from the offshore accounts to secure a settlement that was truly mine. Sarah and we became friends, real friends. We have lunch every week. We talk about Alina, sometimes keeping her memory alive. I live in a different city now, in a small apartment with a lot of light. I bought it myself. I make my own decisions. The life I have now isn't perfect or glamorous. It's messy and it's mine. Sometimes I look at the photo on my mantle, a picture of me and Sarah laughing, and I think about those flowers. They weren't a message of doom. They were a message of life, a reminder that strength isn't about never being afraid. It's about listening to that small voice inside you, even when the world is telling you to be quiet. It's about accepting a lifeline from a stranger who turned out to be a guardian angel. She didn't just save me from a dangerous man, she gave me back to myself. I slid into the booth opposite her. The air between us was thick with unspoken words. I didn't say hello. I just placed the small florist's card on the table between us. I got your message, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The flowers arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, a Tuesday of all days, the most ordinary, uneventful day of the week. The doorbell rang. And when I opened it, there was no one there, just this enormous bouquet of lilies sitting on the welcome mat. They were stark white, almost too white, like bone. And the scent hit me immediately, this heavy, sweet, cloying perfume that filled the whole entryway. I brought them inside, my fingers trembling just a little as I held the vase. It was cold against my skin. I set them on the kitchen island, right in the center of all that clean, empty counter space. The house was so quiet. It's always quiet when David's at work. I remember the water dripping from the faucet into the sink, a steady rhythmic sound. And then I saw the small cream-colored card tucked among the stems. My first thought was David. He'd sent me flowers before, usually after a fight, or when he'd been working late too many nights in a row, a peace offering. But these felt different. They didn't feel like an apology. They felt like a statement. I picked up the card. The handwriting was elegant, looping, distinctly feminine. It wasn't David's blunt all-caps scrawl. And it held just one sentence, 7 words, that made the floor feel like it was tilting under my feet. I am the one he talks to in his sleep. I read it again, and again. The silence in the house seemed to get louder, pressing in on me. The words didn't make sense. They were like a puzzle piece from a different box altogether. Who talks in his sleep? David. He does, sometimes muttering about work, about numbers, incoherent fragments. And I am the one who hears him. I am right there, lying beside him in the dark. So what did this mean? Who was this from? My mind went straight to Sarah, David's secretary. She's always been present at company parties. Her laugh is a little too loud. When he tells a joke, her hand on his arm lasts a second too long. I've always pushed it aside, told myself I was being silly, insecure. But seeing those words in that handwriting, a cold certainty settled in my stomach. It was from her. When David got home, I was still standing in the kitchen. The flowers were still there, their scent now feeling suffocating. He came in, loosening his tie, and gave me his usual tired smile. Long day, he said, and went to pour himself a drink. He didn't even notice the book. David, I said, and my voice sounded thin, reedy. These came for me today. He finally looked over. Oh, who from? I don't know. There's a card. I handed it to him. I watched his face carefully. He took the card, his expression one of mild curiosity. Then he read it, and nothing happened. No flicker of panic, no guilt, nothing. He just frowned, a confused, almost amused frown. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the card. Thank you for coming. I know how this must look. What is this? He asked, handing it back. Some kind of joke? It's not a joke, David. It was delivered this afternoon with these flowers. He picked up the vase, looked at it, then set it down with a dismissive shrug. Well, it's a mistake, must be, or one of your friends is playing a prank. He took a sip of his whiskey. Lilies, you're allergic to lilies, aren't you? Seems like a strange choice. I hadn't even registered that he was right. Lilies make my throat feel tight. He knew that. Would he have sent them? Would she have known? The doubt, a tiny sharp seed, was planted. I think it's from Sarah, I said, the words tumbling out. He actually laughed, a short dry sound. Sarah, my Sarah. Don't be ridiculous. Why on earth would she send you flowers? Read the note again, David. I am the one he talks to in his sleep. What does that mean? He looked at me, and his expression softened into something worse than anger. It was pity. Honey, it probably means nothing. It's a wrong delivery or a prank, like I said. I'll call the florist in the morning, sort it out. Don't worry about it. He came over and kissed my forehead. You've been so stressed lately. Let's just forget about it. The next day he did call the florist, or he said he did. He came home and told me there was no record of any delivery to our address, no order under his name or mine or Sarah's. I called them myself, my hands shaking. As I dialed the number, the woman on the phone was polite, but firm. No order, no record, nothing. I went to check the security camera we have on the front door. The footage from yesterday afternoon showed me opening the door, looking left and right, and then picking up the flowers from the mat. There was no delivery person. The timestamp showed the flowers were just there. Had I imagined the doorbell? I played it back again. I heard the bell ring on the audio, saw me jump and go to the door. But the porch was empty. The flowers were just sitting there, as if they had materialized out of thin air. Tell me what's going on, Sarah. I didn't have the energy for small talk. Is it an affair? I asked the question, directly bracing for the impact. That was the beginning of the crack, the first real fissure in what I believed to be true. David's explanation became the official story. A prank, a mistake, my overactive imagination. He started saying it with a new tone, a careful, concerned tone. You haven't been sleeping well. He'd say maybe you should talk to someone. And I started to wonder, was he right? The isolation of this big, quiet house started to feel heavier. The days were long and empty. Had my mind, starved for stimulation, conjured the whole thing, a dramatic narrative, to fill the silence. The note felt so vivid, the handwriting so precise. But the lack of evidence was a void. No florist, no delivery person on the tape, just me alone, in a quiet house, holding flowers that supposedly weren't there. Then the other things started, small things. I'd put my reading glasses on my nightstand, and an hour later they'd be on David's dresser. Across the room, I'd be sure I'd left a book open on the sofa, and find it closed on the coffee table. At first I blamed my own distraction. I am forgetful, I told myself that. But then I started to hear things, not loud things, whispers just on the edge of hearing. When the house was at its quietest, a faint sighing sound that wasn't the wind or I'd catch. A scent, of perfume, not mine. It was light floral, something like jasmine. It would linger in the hallway for a moment, and then be gone. I'd ask David if he smelled it. He'd sniff the air, shake his head. Smells like lemon polish to me. He'd say, you're imagining things. The world began to feel soft at the edges, unreliable. I was constantly second-guessing myself. Did I really hear that? Did I actually see that? My own memories felt suspect. David's concern became more pronounced. He started suggesting gently that I see a doctor just for a checkup. He'd say, for my peace of mind. And a part of me started to agree with him. Maybe I was breaking the pressure of being alone, so much the strain of a marriage that had become a series of polite conversations. Maybe it was finally getting to me. The line between truth and paranoia didn't just blur, it dissolved. I was living in a fog of doubt. And the fog was of my own making, or was it? That was the terrifying question. Was I the architect of my own unraveling? The breaking point came on a Thursday. David was working late again. Of course the house was dark, and I was trying to read. But the words wouldn't stick. I kept smelling that perfume, stronger now. It was making me feel sick. I got up to get a glass of water. And as I passed the coat closet by the front door, the scent was overwhelming. I yanked the door open. There was nothing but our coats. David's winter jacket hung right at the front. And then it hit me, a memory sharp and clear, cutting through the fog. The company holiday party months ago. David had come home late, his jacket smelling strongly of perfume. When I'd asked him about it, he'd laughed it off. Sarah spilled her drink. He'd said, got it all over my sleeve. She was mortified. I'd believed him. But the scent from the flowers, the scent I sometimes smelled in the house, the scent on his jacket, that night it was the same. It was Sarah's perfume. Flowers were lilies. The note was in that feminine script. The perfume was in my house, on my husband's clothes. It wasn't a prank, it wasn't a mistake. It was a trail they were laying for me, knowing I would doubt it, knowing I would question my own mind. The gaslighting wasn't just him dismissing my concerns. It was a coordinated attack. The flowers, the missing records, the whispered suggestions about my mental state. It was all designed to make me crumble, to make me the crazy wife, so that anything I said. She looked genuinely shocked. An affair? God, no, nothing like that. She shook her head, and a tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. It's so much worse. Did would be seen as the rantings of an unstable woman. The note wasn't just a boast, it was a weapon. I am the one he talks to in his sleep. It was meant to poison my thoughts, to make me question the most intimate space I shared with my husband, or bed, the dark, the quiet confidence of night. They were trying to take even that away from me. A cold, clear fury washed over me, burning away the last traces of doubt. I wasn't crazy. I was under attack. I drove to David's office. It was after hours. But I knew she often worked late with him. The reception area was dark, but a light was on in her office. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. Sarah was sitting at her desk alone. She looked up, and for a split second, there was no surprise on her face, just a calm, assessing look. Then she plastered on her professional smile. Alina, is everything all right? David's. I didn't say anything. I just walked up to her desk and stood there looking at her. I saw the little bottle of perfume on her desk, the same jasmine scent. I saw the notepad next to her phone, And on it, in that same elegant looping handwriting, were practiced swirls of ink, my name Alina written, over and over again. It was her, there was no doubt anymore. She followed my gaze to the notepad, and her smile tightened. She didn't deny it, she didn't say a word, she just gave me a small, smug, silent smile. A smile that said, I know you know, and there's nothing you can do about it. That smile confirmed everything. In that moment, the fight changed. It was no longer about proving it to myself. It was about proving it to the world. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding, not with panic, but with a fierce, focused rhythm. A plan began to form in my mind, clear and precise. I stopped talking to David about it. I stopped asking questions. I became the concerned, slightly confused wife he wanted me to be. I agreed that maybe I had been stressed. I started seeing a doctor. Or so I told him. Really, I was seeing a private investigator. I began to gather evidence, not like a frantic wife, but like a prosecutor building a case. I planted a voice-activated recorder in David's study. I had the investigator document their meetings, their long lunches, their trips out of town for conferences. I learned their patterns. I learned that they were careless, arrogant in their belief that I was already defeated. I waited, I bided my time. The note had been their opening move, an act of psychological warfare, meant to destabilize me. But in their arrogance, they had underestimated me. They had mistaken my isolation for weakness, my desire for peace for stupidity. My heart was pounding. Worse than an affair, what could be worse? The culmination wasn't a dramatic confrontation in private. It was a quiet, deliberate act. I scheduled a meeting with David's most important client, a man he'd been courting for years. I invited David and Sarah to join us, telling them it was a casual lunch to discuss future plans. They arrived together, all smiles and professional ease. And right there over appetizers, I played the recording, the one from his study of him, and Sarah laughing about the crazy wife, and her phantom flowers, his voice clear as day saying, don't worry, shell crack. Soon then I can get her committed, and we can be done with it. The client's face went from confused to horrified. David's smile froze, and then shattered. Sarah looked like she'd been slapped. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just looked at them, and for the first time in months, I saw them clearly, not as powerful manipulators, but as frightened, cruel people who had gambled everything and lost. I had used their own game against them. I had taken their weapon, doubt, the secrecy, and turned it into proof. I reclaimed my reality that day, not by begging anyone to believe me, but by presenting a truth so undeniable that it shattered their illusion completely. The fight was over, I had already won. The delivery guy was so cheerful when he handed me the bouquet, such a beautiful, expensive arrangement, all white lilies and deep red roses, wrapped in that crisp green paper. I remember my heart did a little flip. An anniversary? No, that's months away. My birthday? Not for another 6 months. A sudden romantic gesture from David. That was the thought, after all the tension, the cold silences at the dinner table. Maybe this was his way of saying he was sorry for being so distant, for working so late, for everything I'd been blaming him for. I carried the vase to the kitchen island, the scent of the lilies filling the air. They were my favorite. He must have told the florist. For a moment I felt a surge of vindication. See, he knows he's been terrible. This is his peace offering. I reached for the small envelope tucked among the stems, my name written in a neat, unfamiliar cursive. I imagined the note inside, thinking of you. Let's start over, something simple and sweet. I slid the card out. It wasn't David's messy scrawl. This handwriting was precise, almost elegant. And the message was, it was so short. I read it once, and my brain just refused to process it. I read it again, my eyes scanning the same 7 words over and over. He works late to avoid the constant criticism at home. The paper felt suddenly heavy in my hand. The room, which had felt so bright and spacious a second ago, seemed to shrink. The walls, closing in the second part of the note, came into sharp, brutal focus. Your words are breaking him. I actually looked over my shoulder, as if someone had snuck into the house and whispered this directly into my ear. My first feeling wasn't anger. It was a kind of vertigo, the solid ground of my own righteousness. The foundation I'd built my entire grievance upon just dissolved it. Wasn't an earthquake, it was a sinkhole, and I was falling through it. My hand went to my mouth. The flowers, they weren't from David, they were from her, from Sarah, his secretary. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an accusation, a declaration of war. But not the kind I'd secretly imagined. I'd spent weeks, maybe months, suspecting an affair. I'd scrutinized his phone, his clothes. The time he got home, I was looking for lipstick on his collar, for a perfume scent that wasn't mine. I was prepared to be the wronged wife, the victim of a cheating husband. I had my lines rehearsed. She took a shaky breath. For the last 6 months I've been covering for him, making excuses for his appointments, rescheduling meetings, when he's too fatigued lying to clients about why he's unavailable. She paused, gathering her courage. The flowers. He asked me to order them for you last week. He said to put a note from him. But when I was writing the card, I couldn't do it. I couldn't be part of the lie anymore. You deserve to know the truth. But this note, it made me the villain. It wasn't about his failings, it was about mine. I remember my knees felt weak. I had to sit down on one of the bar stools. The granite countertop was cool under my palms. I stared at those perfect, innocent flowers. Their beauty felt like a mockery. Each lily was a judgment. Each rose was a thorn pricking my conscience. Constant criticism. The phrase echoed in the silence of the house. It was so specific, so damning. Was I critical? I thought I was just holding things together. I was managing the house, the bills, our social calendar. I was pointing out things he forgot. I was reminding him of his responsibilities. Was that criticism? And then, like a dam breaking, the memories started to flood in. Not memories of his absences, but memories of my own voice. I heard myself clear as day. From just last night. He'd come home tired, his shoulders slumped, and he'd left his shoes in the middle of the hallway. My voice sharp and sighing, David, for heaven's sake, the shoe rack is right there. Is it really that difficult? I saw the way he'd flinched just slightly and trudged back to move them without a word. I remembered Tuesday, when he'd tried to help with dinner and used the wrong pan. Not that one. David, it'll ruin the non-stick coating. How many times have I told you? The look on his face wasn't anger. It was a kind of resigned defeat. I thought about his promotion last year. He'd worked so hard for it. He came home excited, bursting to tell me. And what did I do? I said, "That's great, honey, now maybe we can finally get a new car." The mechanic said the transmission is going on the old one. Id reframed his achievement into another household problem. I never just celebrated him. I always attached a condition, a reminder of something else we were lacking. I nitpicked his driving. I corrected his stories in front of friends. I dismissed his ideas for vacations as impractical. I had created a home where nothing he did was ever quite good enough. I thought I was the strong one, the one keeping us afloat, but Sarah's note held up a mirror. And the reflection was ugly. It was the face of a nagging, ungrateful wife. A bully. Your words are breaking him. Did he come home late because he loved the office, or because he dreaded the moment he'd have to walk through the door and face my running commentary on his life? The truth was a physical pain, a hot, sharp ache in my chest. I had been so busy building a case against him, I hadn't seen that I was the one on trial. For 2 days, I moved through the house like a ghost. I avoided David. I couldn't look him in the eye. The note was burning a hole in my wallet. I had to know, why would she do this? What gave her the right? Was it pity for him? Was it something more? The curiosity was a torment. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I looked up the number for his office and asked for Sarah. I met her at a small, quiet coffee shop near his work. I was expecting a predator, a younger, glamorous woman ready to gloat. But the woman who walked in was ordinary. She was probably in her late 40s, with kind, tired eyes and a simple professional dress. She looked nervous. She sat down and clasped her hands on the table. "Thank you for coming," I said, my voice tight. "I received your flowers." Must have remembered something, some small victory at work Id mentioned, and decided to celebrate. It was so unlike him. That's what made it special. "Know what truth, Sarah?" My patience was thinning, frayed by fear. She nodded, not meeting my gaze. "I wasn't sure if you'd call, or if you'd just throw them in the trash." I almost did. I admitted the note was a shock. She took a deep breath. "I know it was out of line. I could lose my job for this. But I've watched him. These past few months I've seen the light go out of him. He used to talk about you all the time, about the funny things you'd say, about projects you were doing around the house. Now he just sits at his desk, long after everyone has left, staring at his computer screen. He's not working, he's just hiding." My throat was tight. "Why do you care?" She looked at me then, and her eyes were full of a sadness that had nothing to do with me or David. "Because I was you," she said quietly. "My marriage ended 5 years ago, not with an affair, not with a big dramatic fight. It ended with a slow, quiet drip of resentment. I spent years criticizing my husband. I thought I was just being helpful, pointing out how he could be better, do better. I thought my standards were what kept our life tidy. By the time I realized I was just eroding his spirit, it was too late. The love was gone. He found someone who made him feel competent, admired someone who didn't make him feel like a constant disappointment. She stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the mug. I see you and David, and I see what we could have been if someone had shaken me awake. I don't love your husband, Claire. I respect him. And I respect the marriage you two built for 20 years. It seemed like a shame to throw it all away. Because of a habit of unhappiness, I sent that note not to hurt you, but because I saw a couple worth saving. I saw a good man breaking, and a woman who I thought if she could only see it might not want that. Happens. I drove home in a daze. Her words echoed Sarah's note. It wasn't an affair. It was a rescue mission, from one woman who had lost everything to another, who was on the same path. The anger was gone. All that was left was a profound, shuddering humility. That night, I waited for David. I didn't rehearse a speech. I just let the silence in the house settle around me. When I heard his key in the door, my heart was pounding. He came in looking exhausted, bracing himself. I realized for my usual greeting. He's sick, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Really sick. It's pancreatic cancer. It's terminal. I walked over to him. I didn't say anything about his day. I didn't comment on his tired face. I just said, David, can we talk? I think I've been very wrong. We sat on the sofa, a canyon of space between us. I started to cry. Before I could even get the words out, I told him about the flowers. I showed him the note. I watched his face, expecting shock, anger. But he just looked sad. He knew he'd known all along what was happening. I am so sorry, I whispered the words, feeling inadequate, like trying to put a bandage on a wound that had been festering for years. I am so sorry, for every time I made you feel small, for every criticism, every sigh, every time I made you feel like you weren't enough. You are enough. You have always been enough. I've just been blind. It was like a pressure valve released. He didn't yell. He didn't list his grievances. He just started to talk. He talked about how lonely he felt, how he felt he could never do anything right in my eyes. He talked about how he missed the woman he married, the one who laughed at his jokes and believed in him unconditionally. We talked for hours, long into the night. It was the first real honest conversation we'd had in years. It was painful and messy and raw, but it was real. The secretary's note, that harsh, unforgiving message, didn't break us. It broke me open. It forced me to look at the person I had become, and to decide if that was who I wanted to be. That note, sent by a stranger who understood the cost of pride, gave us a second chance. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. It was a beginning, a slow, careful rebuilding of a bridge we had both been tearing down plank by plank for far too long, and this time we were both finally willing to pick up the tools and build it back together. The delivery guy stood on my porch, holding this huge, extravagant bouquet, lilies, roses, all sorts of expensive-looking flowers. I remember thinking, what has he done now? My husband, Mark. It's not our anniversary. It's not my birthday. I signed for them, a little smile on my face, thinking it was a sweet, unexpected gesture. I brought them inside, the scent immediately filling the kitchen. I found the small envelope tucked deep within the stems. I opened it, expecting some silly, loving message from Mark. But the handwriting wasn't his. It was elegant, precise. But the words, they were so strange, so formal, and yet so deeply emotional. It didn't sound like a florist's card at all. I had to read it twice. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain refused to process them. He doesn't know, but I had to tell you, your father was my father too. The world didn't just slow down, it stopped completely. The hum of the refrigerator faded away. The sunlight coming through the window seemed to freeze in place. I was an only child. My father had been dead for nearly 10 years. He was a quiet, kind man, a good man, or so I had believed my entire life. This note, this claim, it felt like a physical blow. I actually had to sit down at the kitchen table, the little card still clutched in my hand. My father had another daughter. It was impossible. It had. The words didn't make sense. They hung in the air between us, meaningless syllables. Cancer, terminal. This was my husband, the man who ran marathons, who never missed a day of work. This was a mistake. That's not possible. I whispered, he's fine, he's tired, but he's fine. To be a mistake, a cruel joke, but who would joke about something like that? And then it clicked. The flowers were from Sarah, Mark's secretary. Why would she send me flowers? And why with a message like that? I must have sat there for an hour just staring at the flowers. They didn't look beautiful anymore. They looked like an accusation. They looked like a lie made manifest right there on my kitchen counter. I picked up my phone, my hands were shaking. I found her number in my contacts, would exchange texts. Before about coordinating Mark's surprise birthday party, I typed a message, just a few words, we need to talk now. She wrote back immediately, I know I'll come to you. She arrived within the hour. She didn't look like a homewrecker. She looked nervous, pale. She stood in my doorway clutching a large, old-fashioned leather satchel. I didn't invite her in so much as I just stepped aside. We stood there in the living room, surrounded by all the normal, everyday evidence of my life. Family, photos, on the mantelpiece pictures of me and my parents, pictures of my father. I didn't say anything, I just held up the note. She nodded slowly, her eyes welling up. It's true. She said, her voice barely a whisper, every word. She opened the satchel and carefully laid its contents on the coffee table. It wasn't just one or two things, it was a life. There were photographs, old faded color photos from the 70s. A picture of my father much younger with a woman I had never seen before. He had his arm around her. And he was smiling away. I never saw him smile a more carefree smile. There was a picture of him holding a baby, a little girl with dark hair, Sarah. Then came the letters, dozens of them, all in my father's distinctive handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. He wrote to this woman, her mother, for years. The letters were full of love, but also full of guilt. He talked about me. He mentioned my name. He talked about the difficulty of living a double life, about the pain of being away from them. He sent money. He made promises he couldn't keep. I read a line where he wrote, I look at my daughter here, and I love her with all my heart, but I ache for my daughter there. He was talking about me. He was talking about her. We were both his daughters. I felt the ground fall away from me. This man I had idolized, this man I had mourned, was a complete stranger. The foundation of my entire history was sand. It was all a carefully constructed fiction. Sarah told me everything. Her mother knew my father from before he even met my mom. They had a long-term affair. He supported them secretly. He visited them in a town about 2 hours away. She grew up knowing he was her father, but knowing it was a secret. She knew about me. She knew about my mother. She knew about our life, the public life. She said she spent her childhood feeling like a ghost, a shadow family. When her mother got sick, my father was there, but he couldn't be there as her husband. He was just a friend. When her mother died a few years after my own father passed, she felt completely alone. She had no other family. He's not fine, she said, her voice firm, now filled with a painful empathy. He got the diagnosis 4 months ago. He decided right from the start not to tell you or the kids. He didn't want you to live with the countdown. He didn't want to see the pity in your eyes. He wanted everything to be normal for as long as it could be. She looked down at her hands. My mother died of cancer. I watched what the waiting did to my family. The not knowing is its own kind of hell. I couldn't let you live in that. I thought I could. She found my father's obituary online. She saw my name. She saw that I was married to a man named Mark. She spent years working up the courage. She tailored her resume, applied for the secretarial position at Mark's firm. Specifically, to get close to him, to get close to me. She wanted to see what her other family was like. She wanted to know if I was anything like her. She said she never intended to disrupt my marriage. She just wanted to be near the only family she had left. She wanted to understand the man who was our father by seeing the life he chose. I was furious. The betrayal was so layered. My father's betrayal was the deepest, the most profound. But her betrayal felt more personal. She had infiltrated my life. She had sat in my living room, drunk my coffee, smiled at my husband, all while knowing this enormous life-shattering secret. Mark was completely in the dark. He thought Sarah was just a great, efficient secretary. He had no idea he had become an unwitting pawn in this decades-old family drama. The anger eventually gave way to a bewildering, complicated sadness. I looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time, I saw it around the eyes, the shape of his jaw, the slight wave in her hair. She had his features. I was looking at a piece of my father that I never knew existed. It was heartbreaking and confusing all at once. The biggest question now was my mother. Did she know? Had she lived her entire life, married to a man who had another family? The thought of her ignorance was tragic. But the thought that she might have known and chose to live with the lie was somehow worse. It would mean my entire childhood was built on a silent, painful agreement. I couldn't decide which option was more terrible. To tell her would be to destroy her memory of her husband, to inflict a pain she didn't deserve in her old age. But to not tell her was continuing my father's lie. I was becoming a custodian of his secret. The weight of that decision was immense. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I started talking. It was awkward and stilted at first. We'd meet for coffee. We weren't friends. We weren't quite family. We were two people bound by a secret and a shared DNA. We talked about our father. She told me stories about him that I never knew, the way he laughed at silly puns, the fact that he was terrified of dogs' little things. That painted a different picture of the man I thought I knew. I told her stories too, about Christmases and vacations. And I could see the longing in her eyes. She had gotten fragments of him, while I had got the whole flawed picture. A strange kinship began to form. It wasn't sisterhood, not in the way you see in movies. It was messier than that. It was built on shared grief and a mutual sense of betrayal. But there was also a connection. We were the only two people in the world who understood this specific, complicated truth about our father. We decided for the time being to keep the secret from Mark. And from my mother, it felt too new, too fragile to expose to the outside world. We needed to figure out what we were to each other first. Respect his wishes. But every time I see you, when you call the office asking if he'll be home for dinner, I feel like I am betraying you. Sending those flowers from him, it was the last straw. I am so sorry. So now this is my life. My husband comes home from work, talks about his day, talks about how helpful Sarah has been, and he has no idea, absolutely no idea, that the woman who manages his schedule is my half-sister. He's just a conduit, the accidental connection that brought this hidden truth to light. The story was never about him. It was always about the past finally catching up. I look at the family photos on the wall differently now. I see the gaps, I see the silence in my father's smile. I have a new complicated family dynamic that no one else can see. It's a secret I carry with me every day. But it's not a burden in the way I thought it would be. It's a truth, a painful, messy truth. But it's mine. And in a strange way, it's ours, Sarah's and mine. We're navigating this new reality together, two halves of a whole story that our father never had the courage to tell. The delivery guy looked so out of place in the marble lobby of our building. He was holding this enormous, almost obscenely lavish arrangement of orchids and calla lilies, the kind of thing you see in the foyer of a corporate headquarters. I remember smiling, a little confused. My birthday was last month, our anniversary isn't. For ages, I thought maybe Martin had closed a particularly big deal, something he was especially proud of. He does that sometimes, marks a professional victory with a gift. It's his way of including me in that part of his life. I brought them upstairs, the vase heavy and cool in my hands. I set them on the kitchen island, right under the pendant light. They were stunning, really exotic, expensive. But there was something severe about them, not a gesture of romance, more like a statement. I found the small envelope tucked deep within the stems. My name was typed on the front, no heart, no excess. And os, just a Lara, in a crisp, impersonal font. I pulled out the card. The message was typed too short, brutally efficient. It wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. I knew Martin's secretary, Isabel, had a stationery set with this exact font. She was famously meticulous. The words didn't make sense at first. They were just shapes on a card. He's about to be fired for embezzlement. The board meeting is tomorrow at 10 a.m. The evidence is fabricated, but convincing. Consider this a professional courtesy. The paper fluttered out of my hand. The noise of the city outside the window just vanished. All I could hear was the dull thud of my own heart. Embezzlement, Martin. The two words clashed together. Impossible. This wasn't a personal betrayal. This was something else. This was a warning shot, a cold, calculated move. In a game I hadn't even known we were playing. The flowers weren't a gift. They were a weapon disguised as a bouquet. The petals felt poisonous to the touch. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. A different kind of instinct took over. I called Martin's direct line. He answered on the first ring, his voice warm, distracted. Hey, sweetheart, what's up? I cut right to it. My voice was steady, low. Martin, I need you to come home right now. Don't say anything to anyone, just come home. The world didn't just shift, it shattered. The axis of my life tilted violently. The suspicious husband, the potential villain of the story I'd constructed in my head, vanished. In his place was a man who was dying, a man who was trying to protect me by carrying this unimaginable burden. Alone, the late nights weren't with another woman. They were probably at the hospital, or just sitting in his car, trying to find the strength to walk through the front door. The password change, maybe. He was researching his illness, reading. The silence on the other end was absolute, then a sharp intake of breath. What's happened? Just come home. I hung up. I stood there staring at those perfect, hateful flowers. Every detail of our life together felt suddenly fragile. The art on the walls, the view from the window, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was all built on the foundation of his career, his reputation. and someone was trying to blow it up. He was home in 20 minutes. I'd never seen him move so fast. His face was pale, his tie loosened. He saw the flowers on the island, and stopped dead. What are those? From your office, I think. Read the card. I handed it to him. I watched his face as he read it, first confusion, then a dawning cold fury. His knuckles went white where he gripped the small card. Bell, he whispered the name, a curse. It's not true, I said. It wasn't a question. Of course it's not true. The anger in his voice wasn't directed at me, it was a raw, focused energy. This is a takeover, a hostile one. Henderson, he started, pacing a caged animal in his own kitchen. Robert Henderson. He's been gunning for my division for a year. He wants the Asia-Pacific merger under his control. This is how he's doing it, not by out-negotiating me, but by burying me. He explained it to me in a frantic, clipped monologue. The board meeting, the presentation he was supposed to give tomorrow. Henderson, his rival, had somehow orchestrated this fabricated evidence, and Isabel, his secretary of 8 years, was the inside agent. She had access to everything: files, digital signatures, his schedule. She had been the mole. The note says the evidence is convincing, I said, my mind already racing, shifting from wife to strategist. It was a gear we both had met in law school. After all, I'd traded the courtroom for a different kind of practice. But the skills were still there. They wouldn't have sent this if they weren't confident. We have less than 24 hours to prove it's a lie. He stopped pacing and looked at me, really looked at me. The fear in his eyes was momentarily overshadowed by a surge of what looked like hope. Prognosis reports he didn't want me to see. The distance wasn't a withdrawal of love. It was a wall he was building to hide behind the betrayal I'd feared. Was nothing compared to this truth. This was a tragedy, not a scandal. This is my life too, Martin. They brought the fight to our doorstep, to our kitchen. I gestured to the flowers. They thought they could use me, send me into a hysterical panic. That I'd confront, you, cause a scene, weaken your position. They underestimated us. The next 24 hours were a blur. We moved to his study. The elegant, quiet room became our war room. I made coffee, the strong, bitter kind we both needed. Martin logged into his secure server from home, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He pulled up the financials for the merger project. The numbers looked clean. But he explained where the forgery would be: a diverted payment, a fake invoice, something that would leave a digital paper trail leading right back to him. My access is probably already restricted, he said, trying to open a subsidiary file. A red access denied message flashed on the screen. See, Henderson is already moving, isolating me. Then we don't play their game, I said. We go around it. We find the source. I started making calls, old contacts from my firm, who specialized in forensic accounting, a journalist I knew who had a nose for corporate espionage. I worked the phone, my voice calm and professional, while Martin scoured every email, every memo, every transaction he could still access. It was like assembling a puzzle in the dark. We were looking for a shadow, the person who had the skill to create a convincing forgery. It had to be someone inside the company, someone in Henderson's circle. Around midnight, Martin found a discrepancy in a timestamp, a payment authorization that was logged on a day he was in Tokyo in meetings from dawn until late. The system showed his digital signature, but the metadata was wrong. The location data was scrambled. It's a good fake, he muttered, his face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor, but not perfect. They got lazy. Or Isabel wasn't as careful as she thought. I said, she's arrogant. This note proves that she thinks she's already won. We worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and a cold shared rage. We were a team. There was no room for doubt, for recrimination. This wasn't about us. This was about an external enemy, and it welded us together. By 6 a.m. we had a dossier, a timeline of the conspiracy. We had the fake transaction. We had evidence that Henderson had met with a known security consultant specializing in digital forgery the week before. And we had proof that Isabel had accessed files far outside her clearance level. Late at night, on multiple occasions, Martin showered and put on his best suit, the charcoal gray one with a subtle pinstripe. He looked like a man going into battle. He looked powerful. I am going to walk into that boardroom, he said, straightening his tie in the hall mirror. And I am going to present our findings before Henderson can even open his mouth. I drove home in a complete daze. The familiar streets looked alien. The colors of the traffic lights were too bright. The sounds of the city were muffled, as if I were underwater. I walked into our house, and everything was the same. But completely different, the flowers were still on the island, their beauty now heartbreaking. I could hear him moving around upstairs, his footsteps the sound of his life. "I'll be here," I said, waiting. He kissed me, a hard, quick kiss. "This is because of you, your clarity, they never expected you." I watched the car pull away from the curb. The apartment was silent, except for the hum of the computer. The flowers were still on the island. They were starting to wilt, just a little. The edges of the petals were browning. I didn't touch them. I wanted to see them die. The hours dragged. I tried to read, to clean, to do anything normal. But my mind was in that boardroom on the Fortiscond floor. I pictured Martin, standing before the men and women who held his career in their hands. I pictured Henderson's smug face. I pictured Isabel sitting outside waiting for the axe to fall. My phone rang at 11:07 a.m. Martin's number. I answered well. His voice was quiet, but it thrummed with a fierce, victorious energy. "It's done." He told me the whole story, how he had arrived early, how he had requested to speak first, how he had laid out our evidence piece by piece on the projector, the fake transaction, with the corrupted metadata, Henderson's meeting with the forger, Isabel's suspicious access logs. He said the room had gone completely still. Henderson had tried to bluster to interrupt, but the board chairman had silenced him with a look. When Martin finished, the chairman had called Isabel into the room. They confronted her with the evidence. She broke almost immediately. She confessed that Henderson had promised her a vice president position. Once Martin was gone, she had thought she was being clever, strategic. She never considered that we would fight back as a unit. Henderson was escorted from the building by security. Isabel was fired on the spot. The board apologized to Martin. The merger was back under his control, with even greater authority than before. He came home. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He walked straight to the kitchen, picked up the vase of flowers, and without a word carried it to the trash chute in the hall. I heard the distant smash of glass and ceramic. When he came down, he was dressed for a run. He smiled at me, that same easy smile I'd loved for 15 years. But now I saw the lines of fatigue around his eyes, that I'd dismissed as stress. I saw the slight tightness in his smile, a mask of normalcy. "Hey, you," he said. "I am just heading out for a quick jog." He came back and just held me. We didn't say anything for a long time. The silence was different now. It was the silence after a storm has passed. "You know," he said finally, his voice soft against my hair, "they thought they could break us. They thought they could use our personal life as a lever. But they didn't understand this. What we have here, it's the strongest part of the operation. It's the foundation everything else is built on." I thought about that note. Consider this a professional courtesy. Isabel had meant it as a taunt, a way to showcase her power. But in the end, she had done us a favor. She had shown us the battlefield. She had forced us to remember who we were together, not just a married couple, but partners, a team. The thing that changed everything wasn't a revelation of infidelity or a personal secret. It was an attack on our shared world. And in defending it, we rediscovered its strength. The victory wasn't just his, it was ours. And the flowers, in their own twisted way, were the catalyst for a triumph of loyalty they could never have anticipated. I looked at him, really looked at him, the man who was trying to be brave in the only way he knew how, a cowardice born not of deceit, but of love. My throat tightened. The words wouldn't come. I just walked over to him and wrapped my arms around him, holding him tighter than I had in years. I felt him stiffen for a second, surprised. And then he relaxed into the hug. Then I saw the small envelope tucked among the stems. My name was written on the front, in a neat feminine script. I pulled it out, my fingers brushing against the cool, waxy petals. I smiled, anticipating some loving, maybe even a little cheesy message from my husband. I slid the card out. The printed logo at the top was from one of the most exclusive florists in the city. And then I read the sender's name. My breath caught. It wasn't my husband's name. It was hers, his secretary's. "He said softly, his voice muffled against my hair. "What's this for?" I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. The tears I'd been holding back finally fell. "I know," I whispered. "I know about the cancer." The change in his face was instantaneous. The mask crumbled, the strength drained out of him. And for a moment, he looked like a scared boy. The fear, the exhaustion, the sheer weight of it all was right there, raw and exposed. He didn't deny it. He didn't get angry. He just sagged against me, his own body trembling. He led me to the sofa, and we sat down holding hands like we were clinging to a life raft. The conversation that followed was the most difficult of our lives. It was filled with tears with apologies from him, for keeping it from me with my own apologies, for not seeing it, for suspecting something so trivial as an affair. He explained his reasoning, his desperate desire to shield me and the kids from the pain. He talked about the treatments he'd already started, the side effects he'd hidden, the prognosis he'd been given, the future we had mapped out together, the retirement plans, the trips we were going to take. All of it was gone, replaced by a new harsh landscape of hospitals and timelines. And in the middle of it all, I thought of Sarah not as my husband's secretary, but as the woman who had carried this secret with him, the one who had seen him at his most vulnerable in doctors' offices. And during sick days at work, she was the enemy. She was a reluctant ally. She had chosen to bear my potential anger, to give me the truth. She had handed me the key to what was left of our time together. That night, we didn't talk about the future. We just sat together on the sofa, his head in my lap, my fingers running through his hair. The silence between us was no longer empty or distant. It was full. It was the solid, painful quiet of two people finally facing the same reality. The mystery was solved, but the suspense was replaced by a profound and aching solidarity. The challenge was no longer uncovering a secret. It was about learning how to live inside the truth of it for every single day we had left. The delivery guy was just a kid holding this huge bouquet of lilies. Their scent filled the whole foyer, sweet and heavy. I actually laughed, a little embarrassed. My first thought was, Mark must have forgotten our anniversary again. And this is his panic apology. It was so like him. I signed for them, my mind already racing ahead to what I'd make for dinner, a little pleased smile on my face. I found the card tucked deep among the stems, a small plain white envelope. I opened it expecting some cliché romantic line, but the handwriting wasn't Mark's. It was a tight, efficient script I recognized instantly from countless memos and party invitations. It was from Sarah, his secretary. My brow furrowed. Why would she be sending me flowers? Maybe it was a company thing, a gesture for all the executives' wives. But the message made no sense. It was short, brutally direct. The files are in the safe. He doesn't know you know. Be careful. The pleasure evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp confusion that settled in my stomach. Why would she be sending me flowers? A thank you for what we'd never been that close. My mind started spinning, trying to find a logical, innocent explanation. Maybe it was a company thing, a gesture from the entire office. But the card was personal, addressed just to me. My fingers, which had been steady moments before, began to tremble. I turned the small card over. The message was handwritten, in that same neat script. I read it 3 times. The words just wouldn't arrange themselves into anything logical. Files. What files? The safe. We have a wall safe in the study. But Mark keeps it locked. He says it's for insurance, documents, old passports, things like that. And that last part, be careful. A chill started at the base of my spine. A slow, creeping cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't a romantic gesture. This was a warning. The sweet smell of the lilies suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. I looked around. Our perfectly decorated hallway, at the family photos on the wall, and the whole place felt like a set, of facade, and somewhere behind it, a danger I couldn't see was starting to pulse. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I walked to his study. The house was silent, too silent. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot. I stood in front of the mahogany desk. The safe. A small dark square set into the wall behind it. I knew the combination. It was our anniversary date. Mark had told me years ago, a gesture of trust. He'd said, in case anything ever happens to me. I'd never had a reason to use it until now. My fingers were trembling so badly I had to start over twice. The lock finally clicked, a soft metallic sound that echoed in the quiet room. The safe door swung open. Inside there were a few folders, not insurance papers. The top one was labeled Project Chimera. I pulled it out, my hands feeling numb. I sat down in his leather chair, the material cold against my skin. The documents were a maze of numbers, financial transfers, shell company names. I am not an accountant, but you don't need to be one to recognize when something is wrong. The sums were enormous, millions moving between entities I'd never heard of. There were memos, 2 emails. Mark had printed out phrases jumped out at me: off book, accounting, regulatory oversight, avoidance, final consolidation. And then I saw the names of the partners, not the reputable firms he talked about at dinner parties. These were different, vague international holdings. I remembered the last few months, Mark's constant stress, the late nights he blamed on a big merger, the new friends, men with sharp suits and cold eyes who he said were visionaries he'd been so proud of those connections, now looking at these papers. A sickening dread settled in my stomach. This wasn't business. This was something else entirely. Sarah's note was the key, and it had just unlocked a door to a world I never knew my husband inhabited. I had to talk to her. I couldn't just call. What if his phone was monitored? What if mine was? I used a prepaid phone from the grocery store, the kind you buy with cash. My voice was a shaky whisper. When she answered, "We need to meet somewhere public." She didn't hesitate. The botanical gardens, the orchid greenhouse. 1 hour. She hung up before I could say another word. I sat on a bench, surrounded by a riot of tropical colors, the air thick and humid. It felt like being in another country. She arrived exactly on time, dressed in a simple trench coat, her face pale but composed. She didn't look like a whistleblower. She looked like the efficient, capable woman who'd organized our life for a decade. She sat down beside me, not looking at me, her eyes fixed on a brilliant purple orchid. "You saw the files," she said. It wasn't a question. "What is Project Chimera?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Just 3 lines. The first one made my blood run cold. He asked me to send these, but I can't keep his secret anymore." She took a deep breath. "It's a fraud, a massive one. They're funneling money, laundering it through these fake companies. The merger he's been working on, it's a sham, a cover to move hundreds of millions. Mark, he's in charge." I couldn't even process it. "No," she said, and her voice was firm. "That's what you have to understand. He's not the mastermind. He's the fall guy, the patsy, the men above him. The ones he thinks are his partners. They've set it all up so that when this collapses, every piece of evidence points directly to him. They'll disappear, and he'll take the entire blame." The world tilted. "Why are you telling me this?" She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were full of a terrible, weary resolve. "Because I am not who you think I am. My name isn't even Sarah. I am an investigator. I was placed inside the company by a regulatory agency. We knew something was happening, but we couldn't get proof. Your husband, he's in over his head. He got greedy, and they preyed on that. But he's not a monster. He's a fool who's about to be destroyed. We have to go to the police," I said, a wave of panic rising in me. "No," she said sharply. "You can't. The police can't help you with this. These people, they're connected. They have people everywhere. If Mark tries to back out, or if he goes to the authorities, they won't just ruin him. Financially, they'll eliminate the problem. You and your children are leverage to them. As long as he plays his part, you're safe. The moment he stops, you're all in danger." The colorful flowers around me seemed to bleach of all their vibrancy. The warmth of the greenhouse felt like a fever. My family, my home. Everything was a shield being used against my own husband, and he was walking right into a trap. I found him in the living room that evening, pouring a scotch. He looked exhausted, but he forced a smile when he saw me. "Long day," he said, rubbing his temples. "Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "we need to talk about Project Chimera." The world seemed to shrink to the size of that card. The second line was a phone number, her number. The third was a time. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. The coffee shop on Elm Street. Please come." I must have read it 10 times, 20 times. Each word felt like a shard of glass. His secret. The words echoed in the silent kitchen. The beautiful flowers suddenly looked menacing, their vibrant colors. A garish disguise. The sweet scent of the lilies became cloying, suffocating. This wasn't a gift. It was a message, a warning, paranoia. The smile vanished. The glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fear. "What did you say?" "I know," I said. "I know about the money, the shell companies. I know you're not running this. I know you're being set up." The color drained from his face. For a long minute, he just stared at me, and I saw the truth of it all in his eyes, the lies, the terror, the weight of it. He didn't try to deny it. The facade just crumbled. He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. How was all he could manage? "It doesn't matter," I said, sitting beside him. "What matters is what we do now. You can't go through with this." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Do you have any idea what you're asking? There is no backing out. These men, they don't accept resignations. If I try to pull out, they'll destroy us, everything we have." "They're going to destroy you anyway," I said, my voice rising. "Don't you see, when this scheme falls apart, you'll be the one left holding the bag. You'll go to prison for the rest of your life. Is that what you want, to be their martyr?" "What's the alternative?" he whispered, his voice ragged. If I go to the authorities, they'll know. It was me, they'll come for you for the kids. There is another way, I said, repeating the plan Sarah and I had hastily constructed. We don't go to the police, we go to her, the investigator, we help her. We gather everything, every email, every file, every recording you can make. We build a case so airtight against the real people in charge that they can't touch us. We turn you from the fall guy into the key witness. He looked at me, as if I were suggesting we fly to the moon. Witness protection. Is that what you're talking about, leaving our lives behind, everything we've built? This life is already over, Mark, I said, and the truth of it was a physical pain in my chest. It's a beautiful, dangerous illusion. The only thing left to save is us, our family. We have to be brave enough to choose the truth, no matter how messy it is. Hot and immediate flared in my chest. Was it an affair, the oldest story in the book? But why would she tell me? Was it a trap, a cruel game? But beneath the surge of suspicion, a stronger, more primal need took hold. The need to know the truth, whatever it was now a tangible thing held in my trembling hand. I couldn't unsee those words. He was silent for a long time, just staring into his glass. I could see the war raging inside him, the cowardice that had gotten him into this mess, fighting against the love for his family that could maybe get him out finally. He looked up at me, the fear was still there, but it was joined by something else, a flicker of resolve, a desperate last chance kind of courage. Okay, he said the words so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Okay, what do we do first? Now we're in the eye of the storm. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet. A waiting quiet. Mark is in his study doing what she asked, copying files onto an encrypted drive. Every shadow outside the window makes me jump. Every phone ring is a potential threat. Our old life is already a ghost. We're packing a single bag, each just the essentials: photographs, a favorite toy for our daughter, nothing that can be traced. Sarah is making the arrangements. Soon a car will come for us. We'll disappear into a system designed to keep people like us alive. There's no guarantee it will work. The legal battle will be long and brutal. The people we're facing are powerful and ruthless. But for the first time in months, I feel like we're breathing real air, not the poisoned atmosphere of his lies. We're scared, but we're together, and we're running toward the truth, not away from it. The future is a terrifying blank page, but it's ours to write now. The delivery was just a simple box left on the front porch, white cardboard, a little damp from the afternoon drizzle. I wasn't expecting anything. I brought it inside the kitchen, quiet and clean the way I always keep it. The house was so still. I sliced the tape with a knife from the block and folded back the flaps, and there they were, a cascade of red roses, deep and velvety, nestled in green tissue paper. They were beautiful. And then I saw the little envelope tucked among the stems, my name handwritten. Second, my heart did a little flip, a ridiculous girlish jump. He'd never sent me flowers at home before. I pulled the small card out, my fingers leaving faint smudges on the crisp white square. I read the first line, and the warmth in my chest turned to ice. I know about you and your lover. The words didn't make sense. They were just black marks on a page. I had to read them again. And a third time. The kitchen, which had felt so peaceful a moment before, now felt like it was closing in on me. The air was too thick to breathe. My eyes dropped to the signature at the bottom. Not his name, not a florist's stamp. It was a name I knew, my husband's secretary, Sarah. The rest of the note was a blade. End it now, or I will tell him everything. I spent the rest of the day in a haze. I put the flowers in a vase, arranging them mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Every time I looked at them, I felt a jolt. They were a centerpiece of betrayal right there in the middle of my home. I started picking apart the last few months, looking for clues. I'd missed the late nights at the office had become more frequent. A big merger, he'd said, lots of loose ends. I'd believed him then. There was the new passcode on his phone. He'd always used our anniversary. One night I actually stumbled back a step, my hip hitting the edge of the counter. The pain was sharp, real, a momentary anchor in the dizzying freefall. Sarah, quiet, efficient, always smiling. Sarah. She brought David his coffee every morning. She organized his travel itinerary. She knew his schedule better than I did. And now apparently, she knew mine. The roses seemed to mock me from the box, their perfume suddenly cloying and sickly sweet. This wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a threat, a grenade delivered in a bouquet. The perfect polished surface of my life, the lovely home, the successful husband, the respectable facade, it was all just a thin pane of glass, and Sarah had just thrown a stone. My first thought was my phone. I fumbled for it in my pocket, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unlock the screen. I had to call him my lover. I had to warn him. The phone rang once, twice, a hollow sound that echoed the pounding in my ears. Voicemail, his calm professional greeting. "You've reached Mark, leave a message." I couldn't. What would I say? I just hung up. I texted. Instead, my thumbs, clumsy emergency. "Call me now." I stared at the screen, waiting for the little dots to appear. Nothing. The paranoia started to bloom, then ugly and fast. Was she watching the house right now? I rushed to the front window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The street was empty, just a neighbor's car, a kid's bicycle left on a lawn. Normal. But it felt like a set. I looked at my own car in the driveway. Had she followed me last Tuesday? Had she seen me meet Mark at that little hotel across town? I thought we'd been so careful. The separate cars, the cash payments, a performance of secrecy that now felt laughably transparent. Then my mind turned to David, my husband. Had he been acting strangely? I replayed breakfast this morning. He'd been quiet, scrolling through news on his tablet. But he was always quiet. He'd kissed my cheek. Before he left, his lips a dry, absent-minded brush against my skin. Was that different? Had there been a new distance in his eyes that I wrapped up in my own guilt? Had simply failed to notice? Maybe Sarah hadn't just sent the note to me. Maybe she'd already told him. Maybe his silence wasn't just his usual preoccupation with work. Maybe it was the quiet of a man who knows his world is about to shatter. And that's when the real fear took root. It wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the dawning, horrifying understanding of Sarah's motive. This wasn't a power play. It wasn't a simple case of blackmail for money. The note, the intensity of it ended. Or I will tell him. It was the tone of someone who cared, someone who was invested. This was a threat born of jealousy, yes. But not the jealousy of a scorned employee. This was the raw, desperate jealousy of a woman in love. Sarah wasn't just protecting David's business interests. She was protecting his heart. And she saw me as the one who was breaking it. 3 days passed, 3 days of jumping at every doorbell, of scanning David's face for any hint of knowledge of my phone, feeling like a live wire in my hand. Mark had finally called back, his voice hushed. And panicked. We'd agreed to stop all contact immediately, a clean break. It felt less like a decision, and more like a surrender. The affair was over, killed by a bouquet of roses. But the danger wasn't. Sarah still knew. She held the truth in her hands, and I had no idea what she would do with it. The silence from her was. Picked it up to charge it, and the screen didn't recognize my fingerprint. When I asked, he'd just shrugged it off. Security update forced me to change it. There was the emotional distance, a gap that had been slowly widening. Id chalked it up to stress, to the weight of his job. We'd been married for 15 years. These ebbs and flows were normal, weren't they? But now every forgotten goodbye kiss, every time he'd rolled away from me in bed, felt like evidence. Sarah's note was the key that turned all these vague anxieties. Worse than the initial threat, it was a waiting game, and I was losing my mind. Then the email came, not to my personal account, but to the one I used for volunteering. It was from her. No subject line, just a time and an address for a coffee shop I'd never heard of, followed by a single sentence. "We need to talk for David's sake." It wasn't a request, it was a summons. My first instinct was to refuse, to delete it, to block her. But I knew I couldn't. She had all the power. I had to go. The coffee shop was in a part of town I never visited, all industrial lighting and exposed brick. She was already there, sitting in a booth in the back, a single mug in front of her. She looked smaller than she did in the office, younger. The professional blazer was gone. She was just a woman in a simple sweater, her face pale and serious. I slid into the seat opposite her. The air between us was brittle. She didn't say hello, she just looked at me, her gaze steady, and all the politeness she maintained at the office was stripped away. "Did you end it?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. "Good," she said, but there was no triumph in her voice, only a deep, profound sadness. She looked down at her hands, wrapped around the mug. "You think I am trying to hurt you, or that I want something from you? I don't. This was never about you." "Then why?" I managed to whisper. "Why would you do this?" She looked up, and her eyes were shining with unshed tears. "Because I see him every single day. I see him. I see the way he looks at his phone sometimes, with this emptiness. I hear the tiredness in his voice when he calls you to say he'll be late. I've watched him become quieter, more distant over the past year. At first I thought it was just work stress. But then I started to see the pattern, the way he'd become hesitant before going home, the way he talks about you. It's with so much care, so much caution, like he's walking on a floor he thinks might give way." Her words were like punches, each one landing with a sickening truth. I had seen those things too, of course. I had attributed them to the natural cooling of a long marriage. I had used them to justify my own actions. But hearing them described by someone else, by this woman, who observed him with such painful clarity, made them real in a way I had never allowed them to be.